You think you already know the darkest Hollywood stories, but the vault of old secrets is still wide open. Behind every perfect red carpet smile and glossy studio family portrait, there were scandals so intense they needed whole teams of fixers and piles of quiet money just to keep them buried. What you are about to hear is not just gossip. It is the real emotional bill that came due when the cameras stopped rolling and the studio lights went dark. Hollywood's so-called golden age was never only about making movies. It was about manufacturing human beings, rebuilding real people into marketable fantasies and then punishing them whenever the truth tried to push through. When the first leaks from studio archives and private memoirs appeared, it felt like the worst had already been exposed, but there was much more. These hidden stories show how far the system would go to protect its image and how many lives were quietly broken to keep the dream alive. But before starting this video, please subscribe to the channel and like it. This will help develop the channel. 1. Elizabeth Taylor. Elizabeth Taylor's legendary violet eyes made the world fall in love with her. But those same eyes were trained to hide family shame and pain. Her official story said she was the daughter of a respectable art dealer father and a polished social climbing mother. But behind that clean studio biography stood a very different family past. Her father had once gone to prison over financial crimes, something the studio scrubbed from every public record the moment she became their young star. Even more explosive was the family's long, secret history of mental health struggles that executives feared might follow her. Taylor's maternal relatives had faced severe psychiatric crises, and one uncle ended his own life during a psychotic break. A tragedy the family buried as deeply as possible. In an era that treated mental illness like a permanent stain on a bloodline, studio bosses watched Taylor nervously, ready to step in if she showed the same signs. Through her adult life, she wrestled with deep depression, addiction, and what modern doctors would likely call bipolar disorder. But back then, people just called her dramatic or unstable. Her many marriages, public meltdowns, and self-defeating choices were not simply diva behavior, but symptoms of pain she was never allowed to name out loud. What hurt most for Taylor was her endless, almost frantic search for stability through romance and marriage. Each wedding was less about chasing headlines and more about grabbing for a feeling of safety she had never really known at home. Her intense relationships with partners like Richard Burton and Eddie Fisher looked like messy affairs from the outside, but inside they were escape routes from an emotional inheritance she had been warned never to discuss. Only later in life, when she turned her energy toward health, activism, and loyal friendships, did her famous eyes seem to shift from hiding her own secrets to advocating for others living with theirs. 2. Jane Russell. Jane Russell was sold to the public as the perfect curvy bombshell, the dream girl who had everything. In reality, her private heartbreak centered on the one thing she wanted most and could not have: a biological child. As a teenager, she faced an unwanted pregnancy in conservative mid-century America and turned to a dangerous underground procedure that left permanent damage. The price of that decision was her future fertility, something she carried like a quiet wound while the world praised her as the ideal woman. When Russell later married her high school sweetheart, they pretended they were simply waiting for the right time to start a family, while she quietly chased medical treatments and false hope. Eventually, the couple turned to adoption, but even that path was twisted by secrecy and power. One child came through an abusive cross-border baby trade that tore infants from poor families, and another arrived after behind-the-scenes deal-making that erased all records of the birth parents. Publicly, she smiled as a proud mother, but privately, she lived in fear that the fragile stories built around those children would collapse. The cruelest twist came when she unexpectedly became pregnant again in her mid-20s, something doctors had said could never happen. For a short time, she believed she had been given a miracle, only to lose the pregnancy after a few months. Friends later said she never emotionally recovered from that loss. Her lifelong work championing adoption took on a different meaning when viewed through this lens. A woman denied the experience she longed for, pouring her pain into helping other families form the bonds she herself had been chasing. 3. Tyrone Power was the classic matinee idol, the kind of handsome leading man whose image was printed on bedroom posters across the country. On screen, he was the perfect romantic hero, but privately he was juggling multiple versions of himself that could never be revealed. Power was attracted to both men and women, and tried to balance public marriages with hidden relationships that would have destroyed his carefully built brand. One long partnership with another man became an open secret within industry circles, yet was completely erased from press coverage by studio publicists. Studio managers also stepped in whenever his relationships with women led to pregnancies that did not fit the public image they were selling. In at least one case, a famous singer became pregnant while Power was still married, and executives rushed to solve the problem quietly with money and pressure. The emotional strain of maintaining those double lives began to show. Friends described him as increasingly anxious, leaning on alcohol and pills just to keep functioning under the weight of secrecy. When he collapsed from a heart attack in his mid-40s during a physically demanding shoot, insiders whispered that years of internal pressure had finally caught up with him. 4. Cary Grant. Cary Grant represented a different kind of ideal. Elegant, witty, and impossibly charming. The man every woman supposedly wanted and every man wanted to be. Behind the polished accent and tailored suits, though, was another complicated private world. For roughly a decade, he shared a home and an intimate partnership with fellow actor Randolph Scott. While studios staged photo shoots with actresses to convince the public they were just two busy bachelors. Later, Grant married one of the richest socialites on earth in what many close observers believed was more about mutual image repair than romance. As he grew older, Grant turned to psychedelic therapy with a Beverly Hills doctor who dosed him repeatedly with a powerful mind-altering substance. He said the sessions helped him dig into buried emotions, including his feelings for men and the resentment he felt toward a system that had forced him into a lifelong performance. But the therapy also left him vulnerable. The doctor recorded his confessions, creating tapes Grant feared might one day be used against him. By the time he finally had a daughter late in life, he desperately wanted to be a more honest parent, yet decades of emotional armor made it hard to show the tenderness he felt. Those close to him said he spent his final years trying, finally, to merge the charming character he played with the uncertain man he really was. 5. Vincent Price. Vincent Price built his career playing elegant villains and horror icons, his voice alone enough to send chills down an audience's spine. Off-screen, he was a gentle, arts-obsessed, deeply sensitive man, living a life that was far more complicated than his spooky image suggested. He cared for partners of different genders over the decades while still entering conventional marriages for public consumption. Within creative circles, his attraction to men was not exactly a mystery, but he always feared the headline that might finally name it and shatter his reputation. That fear intensified when his son developed severe mental health challenges as a teenager. Price quietly poured a huge share of his income into private treatment centers and specialized care, determined to shield the boy from public cruelty. At the same time, a rival studio hired a private investigator who captured compromising photos of Price with male companions. To keep those pictures out of the press, he paid blackmail for years, diverting that money into an art collection that later became famous. Friends said his deepest worry was never being outed for his own relationships, but the possibility that the scandal would further traumatize his already vulnerable child. 6. Greta Garbo. Greta Garbo built a legend around being unreachable, famously insisting that she wanted to be alone. The reality was messier and far more human. Behind the mysterious public mask was a woman who fell deeply in love, often with other women, and who spent years in an intense on and off relationship with a sophisticated socialite who acted as both lover and guide. Whenever Garbo disappeared from Hollywood for months, fan magazines printed gentle excuses about rest or family trips, while in truth she was hiding away in remote cabins or European retreats with partners the public could never know about. Garbo's feelings did not fit into any tidy box. She had passionate affairs with women, and also formed significant bonds with men, including artists and fellow actors who accepted her need for privacy. At one point, she even entered a secret overseas marriage with a wealthy businessman who agreed to never publicly claim her, essentially turning their union into a private arrangement shielded by money and silence. Her later reputation as a recluse was partly self-protection. After decades of guarding her romantic life, she became terrified that an unexpected photo or tell-all memoir might blow everything open. When she finally passed away, her home was discovered to be full of carefully saved letters and pictures documenting a life spent seeking love in the shadows. 7. Lana Turner. Lana Turner was the glamorous blonde star, whose love life became tabloid fuel. But underneath the headlines was a long history of being hurt and controlled. As a young girl, she endured abuse at home that she never publicly confronted, yet that early trauma shaped every relationship that followed. Studios knew about her past and used it as quiet leverage, reminding her that if she ever stepped too far out of line, They could leak details that would forever brand her as damaged in the eyes of a judgmental public. Turner repeatedly found herself drawn to men who were violent or tied to organized crime, a pattern that exploded into a national scandal when her teenage daughter intervened during a terrifying incident with one of those men. The official story claimed the girl acted alone in a split-second moment of protection, but whispers behind closed doors suggested the truth might be more complicated and that mother and daughter had made a desperate choice together. Powerful people then stepped in to manage evidence, handpick jurors, and craft a verdict that would keep the studio's valuable star out of prison. The emotional cost to the family was enormous. The daughter spent years in and out of institutions, carrying the weight of the story that had saved her mother's career but shattered her own sense of self. 8. William Holden. William Holden came to symbolize rugged post-war masculinity, the kind of actor who looked perfectly at home with a drink in his hand and a cynical joke on his lips. In private, one of his deepest wounds revolved around a relationship with Audrey Hepburn during the making of a romantic comedy. The two fell intensely in love, but she dreamed of a big family and did not know he had earlier chosen a medical procedure that made him unable to father more children. When he finally told her the truth, she ended the relationship, and the loss haunted him for decades. Holden had made that decision years earlier to protect his wife after a dangerous pregnancy, never imagining how much he would later regret it. Long after the marriage cooled and Hepburn had married someone else and become a mother, he learned that the procedure could sometimes be reversed. By then, it was too late. Friends said that from that point on, his drinking slid from bad habit into real dependence, and he would sit for hours talking about the family he might have had. Studios helped cover up his medical history, terrified that audiences would see him as less of a man if they knew he had chosen permanent birth control. 9. Errol Flynn. Errol Flynn was the charming swashbuckler audiences adored, but his private behavior revealed something far darker. Over the years, a pattern emerged of him targeting very young girls, a pattern the studio understood all too well. Instead of stopping him, executives quietly paid families, moved people around, and tried to keep everything off the police radar. When two teenagers finally went public with accusations, the case rocked the country. Rather than defending Flynn by arguing the claims were impossible, his legal team attacked the accusers, smearing them in court and in the papers as untrustworthy and morally suspect. That ugly strategy worked, and it would become a template Hollywood lawyers repeated for generations whenever powerful men faced similar allegations. Protected by money and influence, Flynn kept chasing younger and younger companions, often hosting them on a private boat set up as a floating playground away from cameras. Many of those young women left the encounters with deep emotional trauma and no real path to justice. 10. Bette Davis. Bette Davis was famous for playing sharp, uncompromising women, and audiences assumed that same steel carried into her real life. Behind her tough image was a woman who struggled to give and receive love, especially with her children. Raised by a cold and controlling mother, she entered adulthood determined to be different, yet found herself slipping into the same patterns of emotional distance and harshness. Her oldest daughter grew up feeling unwanted, a belief that would later explode into public view when she wrote a searing book about their relationship. Davis's second child was born with serious disabilities, something she hid from fans for years in fear that the truth would damage her career. She paid for excellent medical care and kept her daughter in specialized institutions, visiting but rarely welcoming her home for long periods. A later adopted son became the one child she seemed able to openly embrace, which only sharpened the sense of rejection her eldest already felt. Professionally, Davis stayed powerful and admired, but inside her family, unspoken resentment and hurt piled up until there was no bridge left between mother and daughter. 11. Gary Cooper. Gary Cooper was the soft-spoken, aw-shucks hero who appeared to embody simple, unwavering decency. Off-screen, he was eaten up by guilt over choices that clashed with that noble image. During a long affair with a talented younger actress, she became pregnant, and instead of standing beside her, he pushed for a quiet procedure that would erase the evidence. For her, the experience was physically and emotionally scarring. For him, it became a secret he dragged behind him like a chain. As a religious man, Cooper knew his actions broke all the rules he claimed to believe in, and he began to drink more heavily as the years went by. Studios helped move the doctor involved out of town and shipped the actress off on a rest trip, while gossip editors were fed harmless cover stories. His wife learned enough to understand what had happened but chose comfort and social status over confrontation. Cooper spent his final years increasingly haunted by what he had done. confiding to a few close friends that he wished he had been brave enough to choose a different path. 12. Clark Gable. Clark Gable was marketed as the king of Hollywood, the ultimate symbol of masculine charm. But his personal life left a trail of unacknowledged children scattered across the country. The best-known story involved a baby conceived with a devout co-star on a film set, a child who was quietly sent away and raised under a different name. That was only one of many. Over the years, waitresses, aspiring actresses, and women far from the spotlight gave birth to his children and then vanished from his orbit after receiving payouts and strict legal agreements. MGM even built a small internal unit with lawyers and investigators whose sole job was to manage paternity scares around Gable. Some women who tried to go public found their careers instantly destroyed. Others accepted the money and the silence clause because they saw no other option. Gable himself sometimes arranged anonymous gifts and kept tabs on a few of the children from a distance, but he never stepped forward as a father. After his passing, so many people came forward claiming blood ties that his estate spent years fending off lawsuits rather than trying to understand the human cost behind them. 13. Frances Farmer. Frances Farmer had the looks and talent to become one of the era's biggest stars, but she refused to play by studio rules. She spoke bluntly about unfair contracts and controlling behavior from executives, and powerful men quickly decided she needed to be taught a lesson. As her conflicts with the studio escalated, a campaign began to paint her as unstable and difficult, setting the stage for something far more brutal. With pressure from those executives, her own mother eventually signed the papers that allowed doctors to lock Farmer away. Inside a state hospital, Farmer was subjected to harsh treatments, popular at the time, including repeated electric shocks and possibly even crude brain surgery. These procedures, often done with little anesthesia and less compassion, left lasting damage. When she tried to describe what had been done to her, people dismissed her words as proof that she really was crazy. The circular logic was perfect for the institutions around her. Abuse led to trauma, trauma led to outbursts, and those outbursts were then used as justification for more control. By the time she was released, the vibrant, rebellious woman who had once terrified studio bosses had been largely broken. 14. Gene Tierney. Gene Tierney seemed almost unreal on screen, all perfect cheekbones and effortless elegance, but off-screen she carried one of the most heartbreaking stories in Hollywood. While pregnant with her first child, she volunteered at an event meant to lift the spirits of service members during the war. A fan, desperate to meet her, ignored quarantine orders and showed up despite being sick with German measles. Tierney later contracted the illness, and her daughter was born with severe disabilities that would require care for life. Years later, at a casual social gathering, that same fan proudly told Tierney the story of sneaking out while contagious just to see her that night. Not realizing the connection, the realization hit the actress like a physical blow. Overwhelmed with guilt, rage, and grief, Tierney began to spiral into deep depression and anxiety. Rather than fully support her, the studio tried to keep the truth quiet and framed her as temperamental whenever she could not perform. She bounced in and out of clinics, receiving electric shock treatments that stripped away memories without healing the wound at the center of her life. 15. Vivien Leigh. Vivien Leigh's performance as Scarlett O'Hara made her an immortal screen icon. But her off-screen reality was dominated by a severe mood disorder that few understood at the time. To outsiders, her swings between intense charm and crushing despair looked like dramatic flair or exhaustion. In private, her husband Laurence Olivier sometimes had to physically restrain her during manic episodes to keep her from putting herself in dangerous situations. Those episodes often included bursts of risky romantic behavior that horrified her once the mood passed. Even as she struggled, studios preferred to hide her condition behind soothing press releases about flu or fatigue. Doctors turned to the same aggressive treatments used on other troubled stars, shocking her brain repeatedly in an attempt to reset her moods. The side effects left her forgetful and disoriented, yet the industry still tried to squeeze more performances out of her whenever she seemed stable enough. Her daughter from an earlier marriage watched her mother drift in and out of hospitals, growing up with a parent who was often absent not by choice but by illness. Which of these stories resonated with you the most? If you found value in this tribute, please share your thoughts. It helps keep the memory of these stars alive. Thanks for watching this video. Please subscribe and like it. It really helps with channel promotion.